Imagine a quiet summer day in the Roman Empire. The streets of Pompeii are alive, with merchants selling their goods, children laughing in the forums, and citizens enjoying the pleasures of Roman life. Above them towers Mount Vesuvius, a silent giant, green with vineyards.com, and unthreatening. But in a single moment, that calm will vanish. A roar will split the skies. A storm of fire and ash will descend. And within hours, an entire city will be buried alive, frozen in time for nearly 2,000 years. This is the story of Pompeii. This is the day the mountain awoke. Part 1. Pompeii before the disaster. In the summer of 79 CE, before the mountain awoke, Pompeii was a thriving Roman city full of life, color, and prosperity. To understand the tragedy that would one day befall it, we must first step back into its streets as they were, when the shadow of Mount Vesuvius was not a warning but a backdrop to daily existence. Pompeii stood near the Bay of Naples, surrounded by fertile land, nourished by the very volcanic soil that would later betray it. The region was lush, producing wine, olives, and grain that sustained local citizens and supplied distant markets. Villas lined the countryside, adorned with frescoes and mosaics, many belonging to wealthy Romans who used Pompeii as a retreat from the pressures of Rome itself. Life here was comfortable, even indulgent. The city had temples, theaters, baths, marketplaces, and bustling taverns where laughter and conversation filled the air. The streets of Pompeii were paved in stone, carefully laid out in a grid, a reminder of Rome's engineering genius. Chariot tracks carved into the cobblestones still showed how busy the thoroughfares were. In the Forum, the beating heart of civic life, statues of emperors and gods towered above the citizens, who debated politics, struck business deals, or gathered for festivals. It was a city that combined the grandeur of Rome with the intimacy of a provincial town. Pompeii's people reflected the diversity of the Roman world. Merchants traded goods from across the Mediterranean: African grain, Egyptian papyrus, Greek pottery, Syrian glass. Foreigners, freedmen, slaves, and citizens mingled in the streets. Latin was spoken, but one could also hear Greek and local dialects. Religion, too, reflected this blend of cultures. The temples honored Jupiter, Venus, Apollo, and the imperial cult, but also Egyptian deities like Isis, whose worship had spread widely in the empire. Daily life followed the rhythm of the Roman world. In the morning, citizens visited the public baths, not just for cleanliness, but for socializing. The baths were more than pools. They had gyms, libraries, and gardens. Here, Pompeians met friends, conducted business, or simply enjoyed leisure. Markets buzzed with energy as vendors sold bread, fruit, and fish caught fresh from the bay. Bakers worked from dawn, producing loaves stamped with seals, bearing the names of their owners. Wealthier households dined on delicacies like dormice, honey cakes, and imported spices, while the poorer subsisted on simpler meals of bread, olives, and porridge. Pompeii also lived for entertainment. The amphitheater, one of the earliest stone amphitheaters in the Roman world, held up to 20,000 spectators. Gladiatorial games thrilled the masses, with fighters battling for glory, survival, or freedom. Plays and comedies were performed in open-air theaters, echoing with laughter and applause. Festivals honored the gods with music, dancing, and sacrifice. Life was often hard for the poor and enslaved, but Pompeii still offered moments of joy, celebration, and collective identity. The art of Pompeii revealed much about its people. Houses displayed frescoes of gods, myths, and everyday life. Some walls bore erotic paintings, reminders of a society more open about sexuality than many cultures that followed. Graffiti scrawled across walls captured voices both crude and poetic, love notes, political slogans, insults, jokes. These writings, preserved for centuries under the ash, revealed the humor and humanity of a city now silent. Yet, beneath this flourishing life, there were warnings. Decades before the Great Eruption, in 62 CE, a powerful earthquake struck the Bay of Naples, damaging temples, homes, and public buildings. Many thought it a punishment from the gods. Reconstruction was still ongoing by 79 CE, evidence that seismic unrest was part of life in the region. But the people of Pompeii, like all humans living in danger zones, adapted. The soil was rich, the land prosperous, and the mountains seemed dormant. To them, the risks were worth it. Mount Vesuvius itself was not seen as a monster. In fact, its slopes were cultivated with vineyards, producing wine so famous that Roman poets celebrated it in verse. To the citizens, it was not a destroyer but a giver of life. They had no concept of volcanology. They did not understand that the mountain was capable of explosive fury. To them, the rumblings were little more than natural tremors in a restless earth. Pompeii was also deeply connected to the broader politics of the empire. As a colony, it had veterans settled there by generals like Sulla in the 1st century BCE. Its citizens had ties to Rome's elite, and its wealth flowed upward into imperial coffers. The emperor at the time of the eruption was Titus, a man who had only recently endured disasters of his own, including the eruption of Vesuvius and a great fire in Rome itself. The empire, vast and powerful, seemed eternal. But in this corner of Campania, eternity would soon be shattered. As the sun set on Pompeii in late August of 79 CE, no one could have imagined what was coming. Citizens went about their routines, dining with family, drinking wine, enjoying games and music. The shadows of oil lamps flickered against the painted walls of villas. Merchants locked up their shops. Farmers returned from the fields. Slaves prepared meals, while children laughed in courtyards. And above them all, the mountain loomed, silent, watchful, indifferent. In hindsight, there were signs. Strange tremors had shaken the city in the days before the eruption. Animals behaved oddly. Wells dried up. Yet these warnings were ignored or misunderstood. The people of Pompeii had lived through earthquakes before. Why should this be any different? No one could imagine that within 24 hours, their world would vanish. And so, on the eve of destruction, Pompeii thrived. It was a city alive with contradictions, wealth and poverty, beauty and brutality, joy and hardship. Its people lived as we do, working, loving, arguing, celebrating. They believed tomorrow would come, as it always had. They could not know that their tomorrow would be swallowed in fire and ash. History remembers Pompeii not only because it was destroyed, but because it was preserved. The very disaster that buried it also saved it, locking its people, homes, and streets in a time capsule. But before the ash fell, before the cries and chaos, Pompeii was simply a Roman city, proud, vibrant, alive. And it is this life, as much as its death, that makes its story endure. Pompeii before the disaster reminds us that history is fragile. Civilizations flourish, believing themselves permanent, yet all it takes is a single day, a single eruption, to sweep them away. The tragedy of Pompeii is that its people never saw it coming. The lesson of Pompeii is that we, too, live beneath our own mountains, often unaware of the forces that may one day awaken. Part 2. The eruption of 79 CE. On the morning of August 24, 79 CE, life in Pompeii began as it always had. The sun rose over the Bay of Naples, casting golden light across the tiled roofs and narrow streets. Merchants opened their shops. Farmers led carts of produce into the city. In the amphitheater, workers prepared for upcoming games. In the villas, slaves lit fires and carried water, while their masters planned their day. To the people of Pompeii, it was a day like any other. To Mount Vesuvius, it was the moment of awakening. Shortly after noon, a deep rumbling shook the earth. Birds scattered from the mountain slopes. Dogs howled in the streets. People paused, uneasy but not alarmed. Earthquakes were not unusual in this region. But then, with a thunderous roar, the mountains split open. A column of black ash and pumice shot into the sky, climbing miles above the earth. Pliny the Younger, who watched from across the bay, later described it as a pine tree with a trunk of smoke and branches of ash spreading wide at the top. For the citizens of Pompeii, the spectacle was terrifying. They looked up to see the sky darken. Ash began to fall, light at first, like snow. Children laughed nervously, catching it in their hands, not understanding the danger. But the ash grew thicker, coating streets, rooftops, and skin. Pumice stones, some small, some as large as fists, rained down, smashing tiles, breaking bones, killing those who had no shelter. Panic spread as people realized this was no ordinary tremor. The eruption entered its first phase, what modern volcanologists call the Plinian phase, named after Pliny himself. The column of ash rose more than 10 miles into the air, carrying molten rock and toxic gases. Winds drove the cloud southward, directly over Pompeii. For hours, the city was bombarded. Roofs collapsed under the weight of falling debris. Fires ignited as embers fell into homes. Those who stayed indoors suffocated from smoke or were crushed beneath rubble. Those who fled into the streets faced a storm of falling stones. Amid the chaos, families clung to each other, unsure whether to stay or run. Some packed valuables and sought to flee toward the gates. Others prayed in temples, calling on Jupiter, Venus, or Isis to protect them. Slaves begged their masters to release them. Merchants tried to save their goods. Yet nowhere in Pompeii was truly safe. The mountain's fury reached every corner. Night fell, though it was still afternoon. The ash cloud blotted out the sun, plunging the city into darkness. Oil lamps flickered weakly in the gloom. Thunder rolled across the sky, though it was not thunder but the roar of the volcano. The air grew thick with sulfur, burning the throat and lungs. People coughed, gasped, choked. Every breath became a struggle. Some survivors later described the sounds as worse than the sights. Roofs collapsing, stones hammering down like relentless hail, screams of neighbors, cries of children, the wailing of animals trapped in stables. The ground trembled constantly, as if the earth itself was tearing apart. And yet, the true horror had not even begun. Late into the night, the eruption shifted. The towering column of ash and gas could no longer hold itself up. It collapsed, unleashing pyroclastic surges, waves of superheated gas, ash, and rock that raced down the mountain at terrifying speeds. These surges moved faster than a galloping horse, hotter than a furnace, and deadlier than any fire. The first surges missed Pompeii, flowing instead toward Herculaneum, the city on the western side of the volcano. There, the surges struck with unimaginable force. Entire buildings were buried in seconds. The heat alone killed instantly, vaporizing flesh and leaving only skeletons. Wooden roofs burst into flames. People sheltering on the shore were overcome before they could board boats. The sea boiled as the surges reached the water, sending waves crashing back against the coast. In Pompeii, the citizens could see the glowing clouds racing down the mountain. Many must have prayed it would pass them by. But just before dawn, the surges turned toward the city. The first wave swept through, filling streets with choking gas and blinding ash. Those still alive fell where they stood, their bodies contorted in agony. Some covered their faces with cloth. Some reached for loved ones. Some curled into themselves, unable to breathe. The surges buried them instantly, preserving them in the positions of their final moments. More surges followed, each deadlier than the last. Buildings crumbled, temples fell, statues toppled. The forum vanished beneath waves of ash. By the time the eruption ended, Pompeii was gone, sealed beneath meters of pumice and ash. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of cooling lava and the crackle of fires dying out. Pliny the Younger, writing years later, captured the despair of that day. From across the bay, he and his mother watched in terror as the sky turned black and the sea seemed to retreat. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, had sailed toward the eruption to rescue friends in Stabia, only to be overcome by fumes. For Pliny and others, the eruption was not just a disaster, but an event beyond comprehension. It was as though the gods themselves had turned against them. The death toll remains debated. Ancient sources suggest thousands perished, though modern archaeology estimates between 12,000 and 16,000 across the region. What is certain is that entire communities were erased in less than 24 hours. Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabia, Oplantis, all buried, all lost. For centuries, the cities lay silent under the ash. Survivors never returned to rebuild. The land was cursed in memory, marked by tragedy. The eruption of 79 CE became a story told in whispers, a reminder of nature's unstoppable power. What makes the story of Pompeii so haunting is not only the scale of destruction, but the intimacy of what was preserved. The ash-sealed homes, shops, temples, even food on tables. Loaves of bread, charred but intact, were found in ovens. Frescoes still bright with color survived beneath the layers. Dogs were frozen mid-chain, their collars still clasped around their necks. Human bodies once lost emerged as plaster casts centuries later, showing expressions of fear, pain, or peace. The eruption of Vesuvius is more than a natural disaster. It is a human story. It reminds us of the fragility of life, the unpredictability of nature, and the illusion of permanence. Pompeii's citizens believed their world was secure, their routines eternal, but in a single day, everything ended. The eruption also forces us to reflect on time. For nearly 1700 years, Pompeii lay buried, forgotten, waiting. When excavations began in the 18th century, it was as though the city had been frozen in amber. Every fresco, every street, every human form spoke not just of death, but of life, a life that had been vibrant, joyful, ordinary, until the mountain destroyed it. To stand in Pompeii today is to feel the weight of that moment. The stones are quiet, yet they echo with voices. The plaster casts are silent, yet they speak volumes. The mountain still looms in the distance, silent once more, yet alive beneath the surface. Scientists know that Vesuvius will erupt again one day. The lesson of 79 CE is that the past is never truly past. The mountain that buried Pompeii still waits, patient and eternal. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius was one of the most devastating natural disasters in Roman history, but it is also one of the most powerful reminders of our shared vulnerability. Civilizations rise, cities flourish, people live and dream, but nature remains beyond our control. Pompeii's destruction endures as a warning, a story etched into ash and stone, reminding us that beneath our everyday lives, disaster can awaken without mercy. Part 3: Rediscovery and Legacy of Pompeii. For more than a millennium and a half, Pompeii lay in silence beneath its blanket of ash. The eruption had sealed the city as though time itself had stopped. Fields grew over the buried ruins. Villages arose nearby, their inhabitants unaware of what lay beneath their feet. To the Romans who survived, Pompeii became a memory, a ghost. Some wrote of it in passing, but the exact location of the city faded from maps. The land around Vesuvius remained fertile, enriched by volcanic soil, and life returned to the region. But Pompeii itself was forgotten. In the Middle Ages, fragments of the buried city were occasionally uncovered. Farmers digging wells or foundations found walls, pottery, or statues, but they did not understand their origin. Many believed these finds were remnants of villas destroyed in ancient earthquakes, not an entire city swallowed by fire and ash. It was not until the Renaissance, when humanists began to revere the ruins of antiquity, that interest in the buried towns slowly grew. Yet, even then, Pompeii remained hidden. The rediscovery began by accident in the 18th century. In 1738, workers digging near the town of Resina struck the remains of Herculaneum. Soon after, in 1748, excavations near a vineyard uncovered another city. At first, the discoveries were treated as curiosities, treasures to be removed and displayed in the royal court of Naples. But as more of Pompeii was revealed, scholars realized they had found something extraordinary. This was not a scattered ruin. This was an entire city, preserved as if frozen in time. Excavations in the 18th and 19th centuries brought both wonder and tragedy. On one hand, They unveiled streets, villas, temples, and frescoes of astonishing beauty. Visitors marveled at the colors that had endured beneath the ash. Mosaics sparkled as though newly made. Everyday objects, jars, lamps, coins, emerged in perfect condition. On the other hand, the methods of early excavators were careless, driven by greed for treasures rather than preservation. Many artifacts were lost or damaged. Skeletons were disturbed without care. Walls crumbled when exposed to air after centuries underground. It was not until the mid-19th century that excavations took a more scientific turn. Giuseppe Fiorelli, appointed director of the works, transformed the approach. He introduced systematic methods, carefully mapping the city and recording its structures. Most famously, he developed the plaster cast technique. By pouring plaster into voids left in the ash, Fiorelli recreated the forms of those who had perished. Suddenly, the people of Pompeii were no longer bones or shadows. They had faces, bodies, expressions. Some covered their mouths against the ash. Some reached for loved ones. Some crouched in despair. These casts gave the dead of Pompeii a haunting voice, reminding the living of their humanity. The rediscovery of Pompeii captivated Europe. Writers, artists, and scholars drew inspiration from the ruins. Visitors came from across the continent, walking the ancient streets, imagining life as it once was. Romantic painters depicted Pompeii as both a place of tragedy and a symbol of beauty preserved by fate. Poets wrote of its stillness, of the eerie sense that its people had been trapped in their final moments. The ruins became a mirror, reflecting both the fragility of human life and the endurance of art and memory. Archaeology in the 20th century brought even more revelations. Excavators uncovered bakeries with ovens still full of bread, taverns with painted menus, and villas with walls covered in frescoes of myth and daily life. The House of the Faun, with its grand mosaics, revealed the wealth of Pompeii's elite. The Villa of the Mysteries displayed stunning frescoes of secret religious rites. In the amphitheater, graffiti and carvings revealed the passions of the crowd. Every stone whispered stories. Every corner offered a window into the Roman world. Herculaneum, too, offered its secrets. Unlike Pompeii, which was buried in ash and pumice, Herculaneum was entombed by surges of volcanic mud and rock that hardened like concrete. This preserved wooden furniture, textiles, even food in astonishing detail. Scrolls from the Villa of the Papyri, though charred, offered glimpses of lost libraries. Skeletons found on the shoreline told of desperate attempts to flee. Together, Pompeii and Herculaneum became twin testimonies to the eruption's fury and its power to preserve. Today, Pompeii is one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Tourists walk its streets, tracing the grooves left by ancient carts. They enter homes where frescoes still glow with color. They step into baths where steam once rose. They sit in the amphitheater where gladiators once fought. And everywhere, they see the shadow of the eruption. The plaster casts remain among the most haunting sights. A dog twisted in agony, its chains still fastened. A child curled against its mother, a man shielding his face. They are not artifacts but people, captured at the edge of life and death. Pompeii's rediscovery reshaped our understanding of Rome. It revealed not only the grandeur of temples and villas, but also the daily life of ordinary citizens. We see their graffiti on walls, their cooking pots, their loaves of bread, their jewelry, their hopes and fears etched in stone. We learn that Romans laughed, loved, quarreled, and dreamed, just as we do. In this way, Pompeii is not just a ruin, but a bridge across centuries, connecting us to those who lived 2,000 years ago. The eruption of Vesuvius also transformed science. Volcanology as a discipline was born in part from the study of this disaster. Modern volcanologists examine the layers of ash and pumice to understand how the eruption unfolded. The writings of Pliny the Younger remain foundational, the earliest surviving eyewitness account of a volcanic eruption. His description of the ash cloud gave birth to the term Plinian eruption, still used today. The lessons of Pompeii remind us that volcanoes are not only destructive, but also essential to understanding the Earth. Yet Pompeii also forces us to confront deeper truths. It is a story of fragility. No matter how advanced, wealthy, or secure a society may feel, nature holds the power to undo it in an instant. The people of Pompeii awoke on that morning with plans, hopes, and routines. By the next dawn, they were gone. Their lives, frozen in ash, remind us that permanence is an illusion. At the same time, Pompeii is a story of endurance. Though the people perished, their world endured. Their art, their architecture, their words on walls, their very bodies survived the centuries. What they could not imagine is that one day, millions would walk their streets again, not as citizens, but as witnesses. In this way, Pompeii transcends tragedy. It becomes memory, legacy, and warning. The closing reflection is perhaps the most haunting. Mount Vesuvius still towers above the Bay of Naples, green with vineyards, peaceful in appearance. Yet beneath its slopes, pressure builds. Scientists know it will erupt again. The question is not if, but when. Modern Naples lies at its foot, home to millions. The story of Pompeii warns us not to grow complacent. The same mountain that buried a city 2,000 years ago remains alive, its power undiminished. To stand in Pompeii today is to feel time collapse. You walk streets where laughter once echoed. You enter rooms where meals were shared. You see faces preserved in plaster, their fear still etched across centuries. The past does not feel distant. It feels immediate, alive, pressing against your heart. The eruption of 79 CE is not a story of the past alone. It is a mirror held up to humanity, a reminder of our vulnerability and our resilience. Pompeii before the disaster was a city of life. Pompeii during the eruption was a city of death. Pompeii after rediscovery is a city of memory. Its story endures because it belongs not only to Rome, but to all of us. It tells us who we are, what we fear, and how we hope to be remembered. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE is more than an ancient catastrophe. It is a timeless narrative of destruction and preservation. In the ash, we see terror and loss. In the ruins, we see resilience and memory. In the plaster casts, we see ourselves. The people of Pompeii did not know they would be remembered, yet they are remembered more vividly than most of their contemporaries. Their lives, interrupted in an instant, became eternal through tragedy. The lesson of Pompeii is not despair, but humility. Nature holds the power to humble empires. Time holds the power to bury civilizations, yet memory has the power to bring them back. As long as Pompeii stands, its story will not fade. It will remain a monument to life, death, and the fragile beauty of being human.